Rebuild California. Here's Mike Netter.
Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to this week's Rebuild California Town Hall. Not only to those on the Zoom with us tonight, but literally close to 2,000 people that watch us live, growing every week. Oren, for everybody's information, is off tonight. Well, let me correct that. He's off every night, but he's actually not here tonight. So he's taken a brief respite just for this week, and so you're stuck with me, but we have a fabulous guest, Mark Moser, tonight. I want to start off our theme, and thanks Tim Holiday is always putting together a great, what we call the pregame video, is know your rights. And it's time, everybody out there, that you really know your rights and stop taking the word of the press and various other people that consider themselves smarter than you of what your rights are and what you should be doing. Last week, we made the trek to Sacramento to speak up because a legislative committee decided, oh my God, we're in threat. It could affect us. We could be recalled. How could this possibly happen? This law is only 110 years old, and it's time we should pay attention because it threatened our job. I'm going to be direct right here. I was appalled and had only a minute to speak with a mask on. And for those of you out there, I am against masks, but I know I look better looking with one on. But the reality is this, okay? This committee was highly ill-informed. There were people, we watched Shirley Weber speak. Shirley Weber got up there and said, well, it's so hard. We had so little time to prepare. Gee, Shirley Weber, why did that happen? Because your legislature decided to shorten the time period. We had a bunch of political people with PhD way smarter than me allegedly get on there and say, well, the recall costs $5 to $7 a signature. And you know this, no, it didn't. And a very important point in the cost of the recall was made in this committee, that one of the reasons the recall price shot way up. And I also want to say that if you look at our original petition, Gavin Newsom himself, always a well-informed governor or not, had stated in writing, and I want to make the point that they didn't talk in the hearing about what Gavin's response was, simply but our so-called reasons for recalling Gavin, stated that the recall was going to cost $80 to $100 million back in February of 2020. Isn't it shocking that less than a year and a half later, the price of the recall had grown to $275 million? Again, self-inflicted wound. At $3 a ballot, they spent $65 million mailing ballots out to everybody in the state. Half of the people didn't return them. So thanks for spending $30 million, state of California, on unsolicited mail that no one cared about, which is part of what I talk about all the time. Again, only 12.5 million people voted in the recall, yet there are 22 million registered voters. California, you have to care. State constitution, stop taking the word for everybody. But I want to, before I end my initial rant, if you will, start with a little bit of hope. I don't normally talk about nationwide politics, and we've got the best candidate, I think, almost ever for running for U.S. Senate tonight, so we're going to drift to that, but let me make a bridge for you. Americans aren't going to necessarily take what the so-called left is pitching all the time. Everybody knows about Virginia. And note that in the state of New Jersey, and we've got friends all over the country, and I especially do, they're extremely infuriated is a better polite word for it, with the governor of New Jersey. None of the political pundits, those people with PhDs, thought for a second that this race would be close. It is close, and it's a chance that the Republican might win. Also, what you don't know in New Jersey is there was another major upset yesterday. The New Jersey Senate president, who served for 12 years, I've got to look at his name. His name is Steve Sweeney. He's a Democrat from Gloucester. He's the second most powerful elected official in New Jersey. He is losing election to an unfunded Republican, Ed Durr. Also in Minnesota, they again voted down by quite a margin defunding police. So most of America is waking up to the fact it's not about the politicians. And when you go back to what one of the most appalling things that fortunately I was not arrested by the sergeant of arms, because I leapt up, they would have carried me off in handcuffs, was to hear that how inconvenient it was for the politicians that the recall upset their everyday lives. That the fact that you just heard there's 40 recalls going around and how it upsets the lives of politicians. Not a single word about how the lives of ordinary citizens have been turned upside down by this one-party rule that we have in California. And it's time you know your rights. It's time that you paid attention out there to everything that's going on and understand what's happening. Now, we have a candidate on tonight who's been a friend of the recall for a very long time. And as my lead-in to Mark Moyser here, who we are backing for the US Senate for everybody out there, I want you to understand something that I asked him to speak about tonight, that him and I have talked about before. When you talk about knowing your rights, what I found a little bit strange is that King Gavin, in the last year, has appointed a Secretary of State, Shirley Weber. He appointed a new Attorney General, Becerra. And in case you don't understand the impact of that on the recall, let me explain that less than a week and a half ago, Omar Hernandez from the SEIU, which donated over $6 million, over 10% to Gavin to defend his crown, was indicted on federal charges of tax evasion and playing with her PAC's money. Now, the part that I find very interesting here is this had been under investigation for quite a long time. Where does Rob Bonta, the incumbent, appointed incumbent, have the guts, I'll say politely, to hold that data from the public until 3 weeks after the recall? It's shocking. But I also think what's important, more relevant to the conversation that we're talking about tonight, is where does King Gavin have the right to simply pick another senator, even though Kamala Harris was elected with a small portion of the electorate? I'll put that down. Because coming up, and I don't quite understand this because most of you know I'm not that bright, exactly what's going on, but it looks like next year, the legislature says, well, it could be in trouble because of this other thing called the US Constitution. And we shouldn't have our governor picking a senator. So next year's Senate election, not unlike the Mike Garcia election in the 25th Assembly District, is pretty important to the people because I think it's going to be 2 elections in one. But rather than me ramble on about what I don't know, because that would take a really long time, I want to turn it over to Mark Moyser, who is, in my opinion, and in the opinion of us who have ran the recall, the best candidate for Senate. And he's going to educate you a little bit tonight on that process and what's going on next year. Mark, welcome to the town hall. And by the way, are you in witness protection?
No, I am actually in my car sitting up in Mount Shasta, California. Once I get done with you guys, I go in and speak to a group of patriots up here. So I'm on the campaign trail, and unfortunately that means you get me in a car with very dim lights, but thanks for having me on tonight.
Well, it's a pleasure. And I want to remind you, Mark, that if you ever do go in witness protection, with all due deference, the LA GOP is probably much better to hide in because nobody can find them. But go ahead and explain to us things like I talked about.
Yes, I want to actually start on the first topic that you're talking about, what happened in Virginia yesterday, because it's something that I haven't heard a lot of people talk about. And I want to take us back to the year 1993. In 1993, Bill Clinton was pushing socialized medicine with Hillary Clinton, and they had a bus tour going around. And the people of America said, we don't like this. And they started getting on their telephones. They started calling up DC and said, we don't want socialism. We are Americans. And what ended up happening is both Virginia and New Jersey went from Democrat governors to Republican governors that year. And then what we saw is that in the very next year, it was a massive landslide election. So basically, the communists pushed too far with their communist agenda. People woke up, and you saw it in Virginia first. And then 1 year later, that momentum still was going, and it resulted in a landslide election across the nation. This is not the first time, and it's not the only time it happened. But I'm going to give you another example a little bit more recently. In 2009, Obama was pushing Obamacare. And the people said, this enough is enough. We don't like this. This is not what we want. We are a republic. We don't want communism shoved down our throats. And so what did they do? They elected a Republican governor in Virginia and a Republican governor in New Jersey. Both of those states flipped. And 1 year later, there was a massive red wave where communists were given a bunch of pink slips. So what we are seeing now is a repeat. This is something that's been happening where when the socialist communists are pushing way too far into their communist agenda, Virginia and New Jersey end up being a bellwether. They show us that when all of a sudden those states in the gubernatorial switch and they switch together, that it results in a major red wave election, a year later. And so I want to give everybody hope that what they just saw last night is not a trifle. This is something to pay attention to, because it means we actually have a real legitimate shot at taking back a whole bunch of congressional seats in the state of California. It means this concept of a supermajority in the legislature in California could be no more. We could pick up so many seats in the Assembly, in the Senate, in Congress, and a U.S. senator that we could be putting the Democrats on a tailspin for years to come. Now, the problem is what we saw in Virginia. You had a candidate for governor who had zero political experience, and he went from nobody to a rock star because of diligent ground game, staying on message, and working the crowds and figuring out what was on people's pulse. What was the issue that was driving people? And he made that his issue. And when he saw that these mama bears were upset with what was going on in their schools, he said, I will be your champion. And so there is much to learn about from that election. He did what he did over the course of 11 months. We have 12 months here in California. So anybody who says that California is lost, all you have to do is look at what just happened in Virginia. Look at what just happened in New Jersey, where in just a couple months, a 20-point deficit was wiped out. We have the momentum, but it's going to take organizations like yours here, where the work that you have done, Mike, you and Orrin, of building a statewide network of volunteers who simply want their rights back, who want to live as free Americans. Because, see, we live in a republic. In a republic, we are a self-governing people. And right now, the other side is selling slavery, where we have the opportunity of reminding people that that they can have more freedom and they can have more liberty. So with that, I know there's multiple stuff that we got to cover here, but I'm going to go back and answer the question that you kind of led into. What is going on here with this new legislation where we're going to have to vote for U.S. Senate twice next year? And to understand this, you actually have to go back to 2008 when Obama won the presidency. When he won the presidency in 2008, the governor of Illinois. If you remember that, he tried to sell the Illinois seat and ended up getting into prison. But he had made a appointment, and there was a lawsuit that went all the way to the Supreme Court about the governor's power to make an appointment. Because the thing is, when we first established the Constitution, it was the state legislature that was in charge of making appointments, but state legislatures were only in session for maybe 3 months out of a year. Well, if you had a vacancy during the 9 months, what was supposed to happen is the governor had an appointment power that would last until the legislature came back in power. And so that is how the system worked. Now, in the 1900s, when we actually went to where we the people directly voted for a U.S. senator, it created a situation where the Constitution and the laws, all of a sudden, it didn't quite jive. And so this lawsuit went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court unfortunately kind of punted on this. But what the conclusion was is that if there is a statewide election, then there should be a vote for the Senate for the remainder of the term. So even though in the November election next year, you are voting on your U.S. senator to take office on January 3rd, there's going to be a second choice where you're going to be voting for your U.S. senator to go from November 8th until January 3rd. So when the people of California vote for me, Mark Moyser, to be their next U.S. senator, they're going to have to vote twice. Once for me to replace Alex Padilla from November 8th till January 3rd, and then the second to serve a 6-year term, because what the Supreme Court said is, okay, the people are in session and they need to be able to vote. And yes, it may be a lame duck session. There may only be, 5-6 weeks worth of legislature, but that is what the Constitution said, going back to the beginning. And now, personally, I think it would be much better if, like the recall of Gavin Newsom, if it was just the majority vote. So, in the June primary, that you actually got to vote for who replaced them from January or June, whatever, until the end. So they actually had a whole half year. That makes a little bit more sense to me, but there's probably going to be more litigation over this over the years. It's probably something that really needs to be cleaned up. And this is a U.S. Constitution, so that is actually kind of hard to do because you have to either have a constitutional convention or you have to have the legislature do it, and then all the state legislatures ratify that.
Mark, I got a question. Two parts here. One is, didn't our state legislature kind of to cover their posterior against lawsuits like Kylie's pass some kind of legislation? That's part one. Part two is for simple minds like me. This two-part election, does it take the replacement in June and then the other one in November, or are your name gonna be appearing twice in June and twice in November? I'm a bit confused.
Unfortunately, I haven't reviewed it enough to know for sure if it is. I think because we are, I think based upon what I've heard, I think because we are a top 2 state, what the June primary is going to determine who the top 2 people are in June, and they go to November. And so thus in November, those top 2 people are going to be determining the remainder of the term from November 8th until January 3rd. So June is a top 2 election twice, top 2 for the remainder of the term and top 2 for the 6-year term. And then in November, you're voting twice, for the top, for the remainder of the term and for the 6-year term. So ultimately, this issue in California law is there because of the Supreme Court case that came down in 2010, 2011 over the Obama seat. That is really what drew attention to it. Kevin Kiley has been a warrior on this issue, and he's really brought it to a lot of people's attention that California law is in violation of the Constitution. And the legislature, of course, likes to preempt the lawsuits whenever they can. And so I have to really study this to see what our options are. But I'm sure Kiley is way ahead of me on this one at this point in time. Unfortunately, I haven't studied it to the degree I need to fully, explain all the ins and outs of it.
And we have a question in our chat, which actually just occurred to me, like a lot of things do, Mark. How does that affect if Feinstein retires or mysteriously disappears in the Caribbean?
Well, if Dianne Feinstein resigns or dies, it's going to depend when that happens. If it happens, I think the cutoff date is around March of 2022. If it happens before that date, then Gavin Newsom's appointment will only be through November 8th, because there will be enough time for people to file for the June primary for a 2-year term. It would not be for a full 6-year term. It would just be for the remainder 2 years of her term, because she only has till 2024. So if she were to die, let's say on March 1st, or resign on March 1st, Gavin Newsom could replace her, and that replacement would serve through November 8th. And then there would be 2 ballots questions on the June ballot: who should replace her from November 8th until January 3rd, and then who should replace her from January 3rd through the end. So it's very, very, very confusing what's going on. I mean, if she were to pass away before March 3rd, I'm just throwing that date out. So it's some day in March. Some day in March. If she were to do that, you would actually have 4 votes in June and 4 votes in November for 2 positions. It would be really crazy. It'd be really insane. But we actually saw that in some of our congressional races, where we had some special elections where you actually were voting twice for the remainder of the term and for the term in and of itself. And so that is how it works. Now, if it happens after, let's say, April 1st, what would then end up happening is that his appointment would last all the way until 2024. And in 2024, in June of 2024, we'd be voting twice for the full 6-year term, and we would be voting for the replacement term for whatever the date is in November until January. So if she passes away after the deadline for filing the primary, then Gavin Newsom gets to make an appointment that lasts over 2 years. And that is that is one of the problems with the system right now. And that actually happened in a lawsuit, I think in the 1960s, in Massachusetts. There was a U.S. senator who got appointed by a governor, and they actually got to serve 27 months. And the Supreme Court actually said that was okay. And so there is, unfortunately, I think the Supreme Court is wrong in how they have kind of handled this. I mean, if every state out there, if you have a congressman who steps down, you basically immediately are calling special elections. That should, since the people are supposed to elect their U.S. senators, if you're to go back to the original intent of the founding fathers, then what we would see is that our U.S. senators, there should be a special election within 4 months of a senator dying or passing away or stepping down for whatever reason. Just like we see in Congress, there should be no difference between a statewide election and a congressional election. And that's where I think the Supreme Court has messed it up. There may be litigation over the years on this point, but it is a sad thing. I know that we're going to be running out of time here pretty soon. And I know one of the things that you really wanted me to talk about, Mike, is why am I even running for U.S. Senate? And so, let me address that. Some of your listeners know that in March of 2020, Gavin Newsom came out and said, we are going to shut down the state. If you're essential, you got to go to work. If you're not essential, you got to stay home. And within an hour of him doing that, I went on Facebook Live and I absolutely tore the governor up one side and down the other, talking about how unconstitutional this is. And the reason why I did that, I mean, many people said, oh, he's only asking for 2 weeks. This is a scary disease. We need to, governor knows best. Let's give him 2 weeks. There's a lot of people who were willing to let him try to fight this emergency. And I was kind of this lone wolf in the night crying that this is unconstitutional. And the reason why I did that is because of everything that we've seen over the last year and a half. Because all of a sudden he took powers that did not belong to him, and he's put his foot in the door, and he keeps jamming this door open further and further and further, and depriving people of their constitutional rights. We live in a republic where we have the right to self-govern. The government does not have the right to mandate to you that your business is allowed to be open and your business is not allowed to be open. It should not be able to mandate to you that in order for you to go to work, you have to take certain medical treatment. This is pure communism. It is everything against what our Constitution is established upon and the purpose of having a self-governing society. And so when I saw him kick the door in and take powers that he was never supposed to have, I got vocal, and I got vocal real quickly. And over the course of the next several months, I ended up filing over 22 lawsuits against Gavin Newsom and many other lawsuits. I ended up suing the governor of New Jersey and a couple lawsuits against the governor of Hawaii. And I was involved in litigation across the country, talking to people and educating attorneys on these COVID lawsuits. And as I was getting, as much as I love fighting for our Constitution, it's frustrating that I had to fight for our Constitution. To me, it was self-evident that what these public health officials and these unelected bureaucrats and these politicians were doing was unconstitutional. And there is absolutely no reason in the world that I should have been having to fight in the courthouse to maintain people's constitutional rights. And so I got tired of playing defense. And it's like, I need to take this fight, the amount of energy I am fighting to protect people's constitutional rights, I need to spend that at the U.S. Senate and stop these politicians from even being able to think about doing it to begin with. And so as I have been in this fight of this unprecedented attack on our liberties and our freedoms, it just became clear that I had to stop playing defense and I had to start taking the fight to a national level. And so that is the reason why I declared that I'm going to run for U.S. Senate, is because this fight for your liberties and your freedom needs to go from the courthouse to the Capitol.
Mark, it is amazing. And I want to make a couple points here before our time, does expire. We have to let our producer pontificate here in a second. But a couple points. I find it appalling, quite honestly, that we live in a state where they put up stuff, and even Biden did this, frankly, on the national level, that they know is illegal, that they know is going to cut constitutional muster, yet They wait for us to challenge it versus doing the right thing to begin with. Because if it wasn't for folks like you, they simply feel they can get away with it. And
I mean, I've
wanna
had this
thank you for-
conversation.
go ahead.
I've had this conversation with Eric Early a couple times. If I had 1,000 attorneys and an unlimited budget, I couldn't keep up with Biden. I couldn't keep up with Gavin. I couldn't keep up with these public health officers. With 1,000 attorneys and an unlimited budget, it is not enough. And that's why it's so important that we get Eric Early into the attorney generals, so that you have somebody there controlling the 1,000 attorneys at the AG's office to do good and to protect the people. That's why it's important to get people like me in the U.S. Senate that's going to hold the Department of Justice feet to the fire, and going to hold OSHA's feet to the fire, and to hold the president's feet to the fire. I mean, we got to tell these politicians enough is enough. And people are waking up across the nation. And there is a red wave coming. And this is why it's so important that we start getting involved now.
Absolutely. And Mark, I want to add to your point here real quick, because some another thing that PG&E, okay, is being, shall we say, fined or investigated by the U.S. Department of Justice. Now, for everybody out there and go, what's the big deal? Where the hell is our state, who's chummy with them on the donor side? Why, our senators, regardless of party, should have been asking on a lot of these things to ask that a federal Department of Justice to step in and give oversight, regardless of party, in my opinion, to many of the things, like our homes are on payment. That looks like the utility companies are getting away with stuff. We just don't seem to even have the senators. I mean, frankly, Kamala, right, is off running for president, did nothing. I've never heard her open a single California investigation which defends the people of California. And Feinstein, I'm not going to say too much more because I honor the elderly. No, I'm kidding. But the reality is, I haven't seen her demand for any California investigations of her own party, period. Even though stuff that comes out that's crooked.
Well, the problem is that many of these politicians are bought and paid for by the lobbyists. And the reason for that is it's so expensive to run for public office. And so the lobbyists give them money that they to do the work, and thus the lobbyists have the ear of the politicians. And so as such, you don't see a lot of politicians wanting to rock, to bite the hand that feeds them. And they don't want to rock the boat. This is the boat that got them the power that they have. And so, hey, this is their friend, it's probably not that bad. That's why it's so important for your listeners to actually understand the power of we the people. When Abraham Lincoln was fighting the Civil War, he couldn't find a bank. He couldn't find a foreign king who was willing to fund the war. And I believe that this was the first war in the world that was funded by war bonds. And what ended up happening is that Abraham Lincoln went to the people and said, your boy is fighting for you. Your boy needs boots. Your boy needs bullets. Your boy needs blankets. Buy a war bond. And you know what? They knew who was fighting for them. They knew Johnny. They knew Timmy. They knew Fred. They knew Sam. And you know what? They knew who was out there fighting for them. And, they weren't buying $1 million war bonds. Maybe it was $5. Maybe it was $3. Maybe it was $50 or $100. But they went out and they supported those people who were fighting for them. And you know what? You have a massive audience of volunteers who went out there and sacrificed hours of their time, week after week after week, fighting for this recall. And there is a massive army that we have here. But what we have to also understand is that great candidates are out there fighting to preserve our freedom and our liberties. And it is critical that in addition to our time, that we also make a contribution. Maybe it's only $3 a month, but that contribution month after month after month after month means that when you have 1,000 or 10,000 people who are giving you just 3, 5, 10, 20 bucks a month, it means that the politician is accountable to the people because the people funded the campaign that got him into office. When politicians have to go to lobbyists, that's who they're accountable to. And my campaign, we're getting close to 1,000 contributors to the campaign already. We're easily gonna, we're gonna have so many contributors because I go to the people. I don't go to the lobbyists. I go to the people. In 2018, when I ran for Secretary of State in the state of California, I was the #1 campaign funded by the grassroots. By independent media determined that I was the #1 campaign. 47% of all money I raised came from people who gave less than $200. And that is how we end the problem, when we, the people who figure out who's out there fighting for us, and we make sure that we, the people, fund them so that they are fighting for we, the people, rather than the lobbyist.
Mark, let me add something that I heard on Newsmax that I was watching last night. I know I shocked everybody out there that I wasn't watching CNN, but I'm watching Newsmax talk about the elections last night, and you can look this up. And I found this quite fascinating. Before we hit the end of your segment here, Newsmax said, the candidates that are winning now, the Republicans they were talking about, had a lot less funding. But literally the quote was, thanks to things like the recall in California, they've been supported by the grassroots and the people, and exactly what you're just saying. Mark, bless you for everything you're doing to get people to contribute to your campaign, to get them fired up. Tell them again where to go. We're going to obviously have you on and do a lot of events with you, but tell us again before you leave the Dark Witness Protection Program and the car that you're in Mount Shasta. How do people, again, we've got it up on the screen and put it up there, to get a hold of Mark Moyser, to contribute to your campaign, to volunteer? What do they do?
They can go to markmoyser.com, MarkMeuser.com.
Everybody out there understand what I heard last night on Newsmax, what you saw going nationwide, what Oren, Eric, and I, what we did. We, the people, can get things done as long as we step in. Mark, stick around a little bit for the rest of the 5 minutes here, because let's face it, we're way more entertaining than anything you'll be doing in your car for the next few minutes. And let's go to our producer, let our producer pontificate. Tim Holiday, you've got something to say generally.
Well, speaking about trying to step in, I was actually listening to a hearing earlier today about what's going on with our ports. And there's definitely been a major holdup with our ports as of recent. In this hearing, there's a lot of talk about environmental issues. There was talk about zero emissions that they want to try to implement. There was talk about land use to store some of these containers, the empty ones, because they're not moving. Charges on these containers because there's rental fee, like late fees, kind of like Blockbuster in the old days. But overall, there was a little bit of talk about the impact of AB 5 that was set in January of 2020. But not a whole lot was talked about that, which seems to be one of the biggest problems with the this holdup here with the ports. There's a lot of independent contractors that are not working due to AB 5.
Right.
Which is a terrible thing. And then with the environmental issue, if there is better forest management in this state, there would not be such an environmental impact here in California. Not necessarily the vehicles, but I've actually been watching the air quality index for the last 6 years, and I see what these fires do. And I think it was about 6 years ago, there was fires from Canada all the way down to Mexico. And that was just a terrible, terrible time to see what was going on with that big of a stretch with the air quality, especially here in California. the valley suffers greatly with that. The air from Los Angeles actually trickles over to Las Vegas. So sorry, Las Vegas, we love you, but wow. But we need to actually listen to these hearings, attend these hearings if possible, and get involved, because the more you know, the more you want to get involved, and the more you get involved is the more you know.
And that's an excellent point, Tim. And I used to say back in the old days, watch C-SPAN. Look, we all like to, if you're going to watch TV on any given night, I realize, oh, Judge Judy's on. Look, it's NCIS. Oh, there's these game shows and I have no idea what they are. It's not the most inspiring thing to watch hearings. Well, it's inspiring to me, I should say entertaining thing. But the reality is, if you take the time, like Tim talked about, we're never going to be as knowledgeable and as smart as Mark. But still, what we can do, I'm giving you kudos. But what we can do is watch the process. Know your rights. Stop getting all the information that you're getting from the TV, from social media, from various things. These are all blocks that you need in your knowledge to take your state back.
Well, some of the things that they were talking about, Mike, was giving out loans, which is going to be a cost to the consumer. They didn't talk about grants, but they were talking about the transport, like transporting cotton via airplane. They were talking about transport on trains, which use diesel power, which is also an environmental issue. Doing such things, we might as well go back to horse and buggy.
Well, that's Newsom's goal, actually, as he travels in his limousine and flies in his plane. But yes, my point is everything's convoluted, but we tend to take the summaries, right, from what the press feeds us, and the press tends to be slanted. It was important, I think, to note, as we kind of draw the show to an end here, that what the great piece that Tim put together at the beginning, where you saw the little blurb about the press and a couple talking heads, right, wasn't really what took place in this 4-hour hearing. And that, as Mark so adeptly attempted to explain, although it seemed more like astrology than politics, according to when the moon's aligned and the second Sunday of each month is when we elect our senator and do whatever, it's a complex process. But we, the people, owe it to ourselves. We owe it to the people around us to understand and participate in that process. Again, we, the people, need to know our rights. We, the people, need to participate. Tell everybody out there to vote. Again, get out there and participate in Mark's campaign. Get out there and participate in Rebuild California. We, the people, Orrin Heatley, and all of us that is involved in Rebuild California are giving you a vehicle so you don't have to simply wait for the election in 2022 that you may or may not participate in. You don't have to wait for some big event to take place that you disagree with a politician. You have the opportunity to participate in this republic/democracy every day. In fact, more than you have the opportunity, more than ever in the history of America, you have to participate. You have no reason not to participate. Rebuild California is what we are doing, we the people together, the grassroots, to affect the biggest state in the union. And what you saw last night on television, what you're going to see is what other states are doing. God bless them. Their populations are smaller. You saw laws and things taking place. Their laws are less convoluted because they're larger. You saw what their legislatures do in their state assembly. They're smaller. We are the largest state in the union. As I've stated before, if we are really going to help America, we need to help California. And that's what Rebuild California is all about. That's why we take the time every week to say, vote for Mark Mosher. More than vote for him, get involved, get out there. We are setting up tents and things throughout the state. Every day we have the opportunity. Don't Don't forget, we have now reopened our new website, rebuildcalifornia.com. Go there, sign up there, pay attention, go to the town hall every week. There's something that we do every day to push the state forward. And if you're out there watching and not doing something every day, then you're not participating in the direct democracy that we went to Sacramento a week ago to defend our rights. Like Mark, that have been standing up all the time. It's up. We are simply leading the charge, and we need you behind us. Rebuild California. It's your state. Take it back. Participate every day, every moment that you can. Thank you, and we will see you next week on the town hall. Same time, we have another special one lined up for you. MarkMoser.com, rebuildcalifornia.com. Take back your state. Good night, all.
Good night, everyone.